Hi everybody. I'm Andrew Bovarnick. I'm the head of the Green Commodities program at UNDP and also a long-standing member of UNDP GEF team. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here again. I was here 12 months ago almost at the last council meeting. So I'm very pleased to be here to give you an update on the program. I thought I would take my few moments now to focus on some reflections of what's been happening the last 12 months and what we've learned, give an update on where we are, and also to give a few thoughts about looking ahead and what lessons we have that might feed into your deliberations on the next funding cycle. So, slides. Oh, yeah.
Right and left.
Oh, yeah, that's palm oil. And as you can see from the logos, just to remind you all, I won't spend much time on the program design itself, as everything has been approved. I'm sure you all know from memory all the child project documents. But very quickly, the agency partners are WWF, Conservation International, IFC, UNEP FI, and ourselves leading the program. What I did want to just start off with is a bit of context setting on what we are focused on in this program, which is agricultural commodities. I haven't been attending all the sessions of council, but I understand complexity is sort of the word of the day. So it's a bit of a coincidence that I chose to give a few messages on that. But I did want to remind everyone here about what we are trying to tackle. You know, you're all, I think, very familiar and recognize and support the reason why we are focused on commodities. I think agricultural commodities are the biggest driver of tropical deforestation globally. But when we think, so it's an area I think we must get involved with. But when we think about this arena, it's very important to remember that we're talking about products that form the basis of billion-dollar industries. These are not to be taken lightly. We're talking about palm oil and beef and soy products that you use every day, from coffee to chocolate to soap. They're the raw materials that feed into these products for major multinational consumer goods companies. They are the actual basis of business for billion-dollar global trading companies such as Cargill and ADM. They also are the engines of growth for many producer nations. Palm oil in Indonesia is a $20 billion industry. So when we go and engage with these governments, you know, these are sectors that are vital for the development of their countries and need to be taken extremely seriously and sensitively. We're seeing a lot of increase in global commitments, particularly by companies, to become deforestation-free. There's a New York Declaration on Forests, which we're seeing more signatures to. But the fact is making the change on the ground is much more complex. You know, changing the sourcing behavior of companies is delicate. It affects their cost of business. They report to their shareholders, just as the government's concerned about their livelihoods and their producers. So with all that said, what's extremely important is that we do, as a community, take a long-term, holistic approach to manage the risks, manage these complexities, and to also realize the opportunities that are there and arise and are real within this sector of commodities. As I said, I'm just going to put this slide up to remind everyone about the holistic integrated approach that we have designed, but I will not go into any details. There are child projects within the program, one focused on sustainable production, with the target countries being palm oil in Indonesia, palm oil in Liberia, beef in Paraguay, and soy in Brazil. There are associated global child projects supporting catalyzing responsible demand for these commodities and also enabling transactions and financing for these commodities, and then the glue bringing that all together through an adaptive management and learning project. But I think what's more interesting at this point is to focus on a few lessons that we have drawn from the design phase of the IAP. There are many, but I've sort of distilled them down to perhaps 4 to share. I think the first, and this was mentioned by my colleagues, is certainly constructing and developing and formulating this program and the program architecture and design has been a significant investment of effort and time by all the agencies involved, by the counterpart governments and by the GEF. We've had to jointly construct the whole program, come up with a new way of working together within the GEF, with the IAs all coming together. And this is it's taken a lot of time, but I think it's been a very constructive process. The GEF has also invested a lot of time, the Secretariat, in providing a bridge between, I think, the vision of yourselves at the Council and allowing us to materialize that vision at the program design level, and that's been extremely constructive. I think another important lesson, particularly when you're dealing with global programs, is the balance between top-down, so formulating strategic approaches at a global level, and then bottom-up, bringing in the ownership and the local dynamics of the countries that will be involved in the program. And again, I think we've managed that during the design phase, certainly starting more top-down and then moving to bottom-up and engaging the partner governments. I think there's also another area to reflect on, which is the governance of the program and the number of partners that are involved. There's a trade-off between having more partners, more agencies and other organizations that each bring value and are working in the commodities space, to have more expertise at the table. But then there's also an issue of efficiency. The more core partners, the more complex it is to make decisions. So I think that's also important to think about, and maybe the difference between core partners and program partners as we move ahead. And then the final lesson, I think, is an interesting one, of course, and this is nothing new, I suppose, but what goes on in the design phase and what you leave for implementation phase. But I think it's particularly interesting when you think about innovation, because when you're innovating, that means de facto you're trying to come up with something new that hasn't been done before. You can learn lessons, you can synthesize, and you can observe from what other people and yourselves are doing, and you can get your best bets down on paper. But actually, if we are going to innovate and be successful, it only happens when we are doing it. And so that's what we're going to start doing now during implementation. And I think we'll do a lot more thinking. The thinking has not stopped now that we've stopped designing. So particularly, you have a very nice, strong adaptation and learning component. We'll continue to be thinking and experimenting now that the implementation phase starts up. And I think just one example I put down to share, for example, is on impact indicators. Certainly in formulating the tracking tool, we needed to try to come up with the hectares of forest that we would conserve. But when you're dealing with drivers that are just contributing to a forest landscape, coming up and thinking through causality and attribution is extremely complex. So certainly during implementation, we'll continue to delve into these areas, and I'm confident come up with some useful more lessons for all of yourselves as we continue on programming and strategy. And then finally, of course, we really need the time now to focus, get on with the business of implementation, and start generating results for yourselves. So just quickly, where are we? As we are on the brink of starting implementation, what I think is most important is the architecture and structure that we've set up. You know, do we have a strong foundation and framework and mechanism to deliver results, particularly with so many moving pieces? And so I just wanted to go through what we've set up. We have an IAP steering committee, which is made up of the of the implementing agencies, plus GEF Secretariat, plus STAP. We will be establishing a virtual secretariat so that all of the child project leads can come together and basically form a virtual management structure and oversee and support the management of the entire program on a regular basis. Each child project will have their own board, quality control supervision, as you'd expect. But we will also be setting up country steering committees to really ensure coordination, integration, and ownership at the country level. And we're also, as part of the design, setting up national commodity platforms in each country, which is a mechanism and a tool for convening all of the stakeholders in the supply chain. It's something we've been pioneering at UNDP, and we'll be either building on platforms we've already set up or looking to establish new ones as needed in the countries. There are also regional platforms that are going to be established more on the demand side, for example, with soy, and also in Asia, setting up platforms to raise awareness with Asian markets on palm oil. And we will be also establishing a global platform. Let me just spend a second or two on the global platform. This will essentially be a practitioners' community of practice. So this is something we're particularly pleased about, and I think will act as a glue for the countries that we're involved in, and will also be a foundation for expansion and growth to bring in new partners and new countries. But it will be a space where the people actually on the ground doing the work on commodities and deforestation can come together, share lessons, learn, and go back to their countries. So we're going to start with the 4 target countries and ensure that they have the links, but then have this vehicle for expanding to other countries and other partners as needed. This global community of practice will be supported by global and integrated knowledge management. So we will be diving in and analyzing and learning lessons across the impacts of demand, finance, and production, and the synergies between them all, across the target countries and across the commodities. And I think cross-commodity learning between soy, beef, and palm will be very interesting. And we will also be having IAP branding. We'll be developing specific communication guidelines on how we communicate all of our activities across the projects and the countries and the agencies, so that there's some harmonization and we can really, let's say, build the brand and recognition of this program globally as it moves forward. So for now, where are we and what's already beginning to happen on the ground? So we've had the projects approved. We're forming the project teams at the global level, at the agency level, at the countries level. We've started some joint missions. We just recently had a joint mission to Liberia and Brazil. And I think it's pleasing to see the reception that we're receiving. There seems to be a real genuine, I think, interest and reception from our teams in starting the work that we are proposing on the ground. Certainly, we're being viewed as value added within the commodities sphere. And we are also now gearing up for the global launch of the IAP, which will be in New York in September. And we are all coming together, I think, in terms of the agencies to really design and organize and create a very exciting event in September. I think also we're now beginning to integrate more in terms of agencies and teams to plan new activities during implementation phase. Just one example I wanted to give was regarding China. During the design phase, we were all very interested to have China on board as a key partner because they are such a major buyer of commodities globally. But during the design phase, whilst we started engaging and dialoguing with the government of China, we never really had the time or resources to have an effective dialogue. And so now we are beginning to come together again and plan how we're going to reach out to the government of China and perhaps organize a sustainability conference in the years to come in China. So things that we couldn't get done in the design phase, I think we're now really coming together on to plan effectively for the implementation phase. Mechanically, again, we're starting to set up a series of interagency task forces, which I think is super interesting because it will allow us to leverage the expertise from the different agencies. So, for example, we'll set up a monitoring and evaluation task force, which includes M&E expertise from WWF, CI, IFC, UNDP, etc., which is, I think, the first time we'll be doing something like that. We will also be setting up interagency task force to organize the launch and the community of practice, etc. I think we're also seeing that the launch is an opportunity to to really, for the countries to begin to realize more that they're part of a global program. It's one thing during the design phase for them to hear it, but now that they're being invited and the ministers are confirming to come and speak at a global launch, it's really beginning to sink in. And I think from here on out, we're going to see a lot of added value and interest from these countries to be part of a global program and not to be trying to tackle the commodities, let's say, by themselves. And then the final, I think, interesting evolution is how we're also, as agencies, coordinating on the supply, on the demand side with the companies and with the buyers. Each of the agencies, UNDP, CI, WWF, IFC, we all have relationships and trusted working arrangements with different companies and different banks. And so together, we really are going to be able to bring a large number of the important players in the private sector to the program. So this is my final slide. What does this all mean for looking ahead? In terms of the program itself, we're seeing the launch as the beginning of bringing together this network of practitioners, and so we will continue to strengthen these relationships. We're going to be having our first community of practice in Indonesia in October, building on what we've already been doing and bringing in new partners, gearing up for 2018, where we can organically grow and bring in new countries and partners. I think there's a sense that looking ahead, we've now invested in and created, hopefully, an effective program architecture and package of partners. So as we continue to support commodities going into the future, we don't need to reinvent or rethink. Let's look how we can build on what we have already, see if we can be a foundation for expansion. And I think also there's expertise and activities that we're doing in our IP that can be useful for other areas. And there are opportunities for efficiencies. So, for example, our partnerships with companies and buyers, our approach to smallholder capacity building, all of this can be potentially offered as services to areas such as land restoration or food production systems. So I think there's some exciting opportunities here for synergy across different potential programs. We're certainly going to continue, of course, our coordination with other commodity initiatives and also with many of donor-funded initiatives that many of your countries are involved in. We've had a lot of deep dialogue and are making the links with US, UK, Norwegian, German, Dutch, and German-led initiatives. There's actually an upcoming conference in Berlin as part of the Amsterdam Declaration, which is about deforestation-free commodities, which I'll be participating in and really trying to make the links between the GEF program and many of your own bilateral efforts. So, yeah, in conclusion, I think there's a lot of very interesting lessons learned. We've got a good foundation for growing, and I think we're really shaping things up for a meaningful and impactful program. So with that, I want to thank you all. And you've clearly got competition for invites, but we'd certainly like to invite you all to our global launch in September at the UN in New York. So thank you.
All right.